and continue here for at least another round. Dr. Meyer, is it possible to attribute an illegal cell site simulator to a particular actor, specifically particular cell site simulators? Do they have characteristics associated with where they were made or the entity using them? For example, if the device was made in China or in Russia, would it have any specific identifiers?
That's a great question, Chairman Abraham. I'm not aware of any instance in which a law enforcement or regulatory agency has successfully tracked down one of these devices. And so I'm not aware of anyone who's tried to attribute one of these devices once they get their hands on it, or having studied the signals emanating from it and concluding that it was definitively a cell site simulator. And so I think in principle it could be possible to attribute one of these devices. Again, I'm not aware of an instance in which folks have gotten close enough to do that.
Dr. Clancy, you have anything to add to that?
So in my experience, there's broadly two classes of these devices. There are the expensive ones that are manufactured principally for military and law enforcement use, and their signaling parameters would likely have one set of characteristics associated with it. There's another that's based on inexpensive open source hardware and software that you would likely find being used potentially by foreign intelligence. Depends on the sophistication level of the adversary. I would imagine that you could, with relative simplicity, tell the difference between an open source, one that was built based on open source software versus one that was built for higher end military and law enforcement use. And I would imagine that that would also be then differentiable from the legitimate cell tower networks.
Okay. Dr. Meyer, back to you. In your testimony, you state that to your knowledge, other than the recent DHS pilot project, no component of the U.S. government has acknowledged a capability to detect cell site simulators in the field, including wireless carriers. Additionally, in a response to Senator Wyden, DHS specifically claimed it did not currently possess the technical capability to detect cell site simulators. Should DHS have this capability, and if so, how difficult would it be for them to actually have it?
So there are commercial tools available for law enforcement and regulatory agencies to attempt to detect these devices. The inherent challenge with detecting these devices is that there is no definitive telltale sign of a cell site simulator. There are only indicia that give rise to suspicion that the tower appears to be configured in an unusual way. And it appears to be broadcasting on unusual spectrum or unusual power level. But there are many reasons why legitimate cell towers are configured in unusual ways, either intentionally or unintentionally, or where they may appear and disappear, such as getting set up for a special event. And so, again, while there are commercial tools available, I'm not aware of anyone who's used any of these tools to definitively identify one of these devices, and that's why my recommendation is focusing on defense rather than whack-a-mole with the folks setting these things up.
Dr. Clancy, in its mobile device security study, DHS concluded that it believes, and I'll put that in quote, that all U.S. carriers are vulnerable, end of quote, to the SS7 and the diameter attacks, in addition to the federal government having little assurance that it's paying for cellular service and mobile devices that incorporate cybersecurity best practices. Since DHS has responsibilities for the protection of critical infrastructure of the government, in your opinion, should DHS continue researching the risks through pilot programs and studies like the 2017 pilot? What DHS S&T would be the appropriate division to continue this research?
So within DHS S&T, there would be two logical groups. There's a public safety group and there's a cybersecurity group. Perhaps it would be an interesting collaboration between the two that could focus on these topics. I do think that there's room for continued research on developing and maturing these tools. I do also agree that the sort of whack-a-mole approach would be challenging. Anytime you identify what you think is a unique signature for one of these devices, a sophisticated adversary could change that signature in order to avoid detection. So I'll also note that there are apps that are available that purport to identify a rogue base station. And there was a systematic study done last August, it was published last August, which showed that they were able to fool all of those apps into thinking that their rogue base station was indeed a legitimate one. So again, supporting this notion that whack-a-mole would be challenging against a sophisticated adversary.
Mr. Byer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.